Hey there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to draw some cocktails using watercolor markers, and you may have seen the original inspiration for this piece. It was a painting I did a week ago at an open studio, this one right here, and I got a lot of requests from Critique Club members asking if I would upload that to Critique Club, but I didn't film it, and I didn't want to just record the same thing over again, so I decided I would use this long paper and do a lineup of cocktails. Now, if you're in Critique Club, you'll find a pattern for both the thing we're going to draw today, because this took almost a half an hour to draw, but I did make a pattern for that, and also a pattern for the original painting that I did at the open studio in Bucksport. So you can paint either one. You'll also find reference images for all the drinks that are in both of the paintings. But I wanted to do something different because I don't like to do the same thing twice, and I thought this long paper would be really fun. Honestly, the teacup painting I posted on YouTube yesterday, I was thinking it would also be really cool to do a long, tall stack of teacups on this paper, but it would have been hard to film just because the way that, you know, YouTube video players go. So I was just kind of really inspired by this paper. I was inspired by the markers. I was inspired by, you know, the bright colors, and I thought it would be a lot of fun. So anyway, I'll have a link to Critique Club in the video description. It's $5 a month. You have over 100 real-time mixed media tutorials that you can enjoy, monthly prompts, and the ability to upload your work for feedback from me. Now, I'm using the Col Erase pencils to sketch here. They are an erasable colored pencil made by Prismacolor. There's a few companies that make erasable colored pencils, and any of them are going to be just fine for this. I have used the Arteza ones as well as the Prismacolor ones. I know Crayola makes some. I don't think it really matters that much. I think there's even some mechanical pencils that have erasers with them. So use whatever is available to you. The reason I wanted to use them is because I wanted to be able to draw dark enough that the camera would pick it up, but not have really dark lines to deal with. When I did my original painting, I sketched with a pencil and I sketched really lightly, but when I'm teaching a lesson, I really want to make sure that you can see my lines. So if you want to use a pencil, just a regular graphite pencil, and draw really lightly, you can do that. Now, all my reference photos I found on Unsplash.com. That's a commercial use, royalty-free photograph site, and it is free to use, and I like it because it's really easy to organize things. And a lot of times I want to combine several reference images into one painting. So there's these collections that you can organize your pictures into, and I don't know of another site that has quite a user-friendly interface, especially one for free. I highly recommend that website if you are an artist looking for reference photos, or if you're a blogger, or you know, if you have a website and you need images, you know, that's really what it's for, honestly, but I use it for reference photos. But anyway, I found a bunch of different beautiful cocktail photographs, and it was really fun to look at those and find ones to use. Now, one thing I want to mention, when you are doing that and you are like using a bunch of different reference photos to combine them, is that you're going to need to make sure your perspective on these images match. So if you're looking at these pictures, like these are all lined up almost like on a shelf or on a bar or something, where they're all going to be at the same, relatively pretty close to the same level. So if you had a bunch of photos, and some you're looking into a drink, and some you're looking straight across, some are above eye level, some are below eye level, some are right at eye level, you're going to have to make sure that they all agree in your painting, or they're not going to look right. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, you could choose a bunch of reference photos that are at eye level, or you can just be aware of that so that when you draw them, you are making note of, like, how are the ellipses at the top. Like, if it's eye level, you're not going to see an ellipse at the top of that drink. You're going to see a straight across line. But if the bottom of the glass or bottle or whatnot is below eye level, you're going to see a little bit of a curve to that jar or that cup. So just kind of keep that in mind and make sure that your different objects agree. Okay. The other thing you want to make sure agrees is your lighting. So when you're looking at these reference photos, you're going to see that they're all beautifully photographed. Some are in a dark bar. Some are outside in the sunshine. Some are in a well-lit room. Some have a black background. So you need to account for that. You need to make sure they agree. So you need to get your lighting together. You need to make sure that you have consistent lighting throughout your picture. So like your highlights are all going to be mostly directed in one area. Now still lifes, you can have several lighting sources. You could have several lights. You could have a window and a incandescent light. You could have a category or a variety of different lighting sources, but you need to make sure that you've got agreement between everything in your still life. So that's why it's a little bit more complicated to pull from other reference images. I think the best way to learn how to do still life painting and drawing is to actually set up your own still lifes and put a direct lighting source on it. So if I'm going to do that in my studio, what I'm going to do is actually set up, I have this little, just like a chest of drawers really, but it rolls around. And what I do is I put a board across that. I throw a cloth on it. I have clips on my ceiling where I can clip different drop cloths if I need to. And then I set up my still life and I put a lamp on that because I can't put it on my desk where I'm working, because I have 4 lighting sources pointing at my workspace for recording purposes. So that can be very confusing. By doing it, setting up a still life, putting one lamp on it, one light source on it, or next to a window, something like that, it's going to give you that consistent lighting and that one light source. Actually, it's better if you have a lamp and you don't have windows nearby, just for learning and consistency purposes. So keep that in mind if you are struggling with still life, if you want to get better at still life, find yourself an area that your light's not going to fluctuate, that you can set a still life up at and you can work at. And a lot of times I'll actually take a photograph the day I start a painting, because if I need to come back to it, getting all my conditions exactly the same, even in the studio, may be difficult because I have to tear down things and set things up for different recordings that I'm doing for classes and for YouTube. So I might not have everything in the exact position again. So it's just another way that you can keep that continuity and that you can learn and kind of learn how lighting behaves, how light works, before you're thrown into the situation of using somebody else's reference photos and combining several reference photos into one piece. So we go over all sorts of stuff like that in Critique Club. We go into a little bit more advanced things than what I do here on YouTube. And if it's something you're interested in, please check it out. It's very affordable, and I think it's a good value for your money as well. The one thing that I want to talk about these markers a bit, I'm really enjoying them. And one thing I really enjoy about these markers is that they are light fast. I don't have to worry about this fading. I'm going to hang it up in my kitchen. I just love it. And I don't have to worry about, will these be compatible with other mediums? I can use these with my watercolors. I did not have just the right yellow for that drink, so I just grabbed some yellow out of my watercolor palette, and they work the same. Now you can do this piece with any water-based markers you have. So you could use your Tombos, you could use your Zig Clean Color pens, you could use your Arteza, you could use whatever brand you have, honestly. But the thing to keep in mind is that if you're working on a sketchbook, it really doesn't matter. You're not going to get the light exposure on that painting for it to fade. And the working properties of this they're gonna be pretty similar, right? It's basically the same type of product, just a different relative, you know? The Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer watercolor markers and the Winsor & Newton Watercolor Pro markers are light fast markers. They are made with watercolor pigments, just like you'd find in your paints. They will be using less earthy granulating pigments because they need to have the finer ground pigments. It will feed through the marker nibs. But for all intents and purposes, you have got watercolor pigment in these markers. When you're working with other water-based markers, you've got dyes. And so your coloring is a dye. It's smaller pigment particles. It's meant to adhere to your paper, be vibrant, but it will be susceptible to fading if you have a lot of light exposure, which having your sketchbook open, leaned up against the wall for a couple days is not going to do much. It's going to be fine for that. But like hanging on a wall where it's getting sunlight for years and years, you're going to have some fading. So just, I wouldn't necessarily say it's worth it to go spend, like I bought these at Blick for about $88, I think the set of 30, but you could get a set of 100 watercolor markers from Arteza or Hoo probably for about the same price. So I would say it's not really worth it spending that money on the light fast product unless that's important to you, unless you're going to hang it up and you really want it to resist fading. I think working wise is not that big of a deal. I would recommend though, if you are going to go with one of the more budget friendly options, one of the non-light fast options, I would suggest going for, there's a brand called Color It that has these refillable ones with real brush tips on them. And I recommend those because you can just refill those markers, or plastic markers that you can refill them. You can't refill these Faber-Castell ones. So they would be more economical long-term, and they would be cheaper to buy outright. And the refill bottles, I think, are about $5 a piece. Altenew makes them too. So either way, I like that option for being refillable, especially if you're working in a sketchbook. I like the real bristles that those markers have because they don't damage the paper as much as a felt tip will, so they'll actually blend out really easily. Because these blend out pretty easily, and I think it's just the combination of the pigments and the glycerin that helps them blend out really easily. Whereas like the Tombow markers don't quite blend out quite as easily. Like the Memento markers don't blend out at all. Their ink is much more color, like indelible once it hits the paper. So every marker has its own nuance. My recommendation would be, if you want light fast, I actually kind of like these better than the Winsor & Newton ones currently. Winsor & Newton used to have a really nice fine tip nib before they moved their production to China, and now their nib is about the same as these, but they're more expensive. So I would recommend these, although there's no pigment information on the Faber-Castell ones, and there is on the Winsor & Newton ones. So I guess there's pros and cons to all of them. So I'd say you want light fast, go with one of those two. But if you're looking for just a nice, easy to use marker, I would highly recommend the Colorits because they have refills. Or Altenews are more of like a water brush pen that they offer, but they do offer refills. Ohuhu has the same body as the Colorit if you can find their natural aqua brush markers, but I've had having a hard time finding those now, so I don't know if they stopped making them or what, but there are good options out there. And then there's like dozens and dozens of the real brush pens that aren't refillable that are very easy to use, but then you got a disposable product, which you really don't need 100 colors with these. They blend and mix so easily. I would say go with the 24 set of Colorits and get the refills as needed. And then, they're not going to wear out. They're not felt tips. You can just keep refilling them. They're like a brush. So I really don't see going with the felt tip ones unless you need the light fastness. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding some filler objects to basically add some continuity, because what happened here, when I had all these drinks lined up, I realized I don't have any overlapping elements. And when you don't have overlapping elements, I feel like you can really lose that clustering ability, the focal points, and the continuity. And there really isn't one strong focal point here because each drink is unique, individual. Your eye bounces from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And I love that rhythm. But when it was just the drinks with no bridging elements, I felt it was too stark. So I added some cherries and some raspberries and some lemons, and having some things overlap other things and carry the eye through, I think was a really good design element. And honestly, you can just make that stuff up. The more, I love to draw cocktails, so I feel very confident in drawing little fruits and cocktails, especially in this illustrative style. It's not super realistic. I'm just kind of having fun with it. But you will also notice if you look at a bunch of drink reference photos, often those photos are styled with fruits and stuff scattered around, so you can pull from those to get some ideas. With the markers, because when you do sketch with them, you can leave a little bit of a line behind. I can sketch on a raspberry with all those little juicy segments and then just lightly brush over it with water and still have enough of a line there to give me my detail. Same with the leaves. If you want to draw in some of the veinings and just not really add too much water, you can do that. If your paper's damp and you go in with a bullet tip of the pen and you draw the veining, that will remain a little bit, but you will have a bit of a fuzzy line. So it just comes down to getting used to the product and how it performs. Now, I wanted to use this paper for another reason. Not only did I not want to paint the exact same thing again, but also I was curious to see how these markers would work on a cellulose paper versus a cotton paper. Arches cold press paper is a little bit rougher than other cold press papers, and I did feel that maybe the absorption of the cotton paper coupled with the roughness of the Arches paper may shorten the lifespan of the markers. So I know that Faber-Castell recommends cellulose paper for their markers, so I thought, well, I'm going to give this cellulose paper a try. I happen to really like the Strathmore 400 series. That's a Strathmore paper with the brown cover, not the Strathmore paper with the yellow cover. I don't really care for that one, but honestly, use what you have. But I'd say if you are in the market to buy some new paper, I like the Strathmore with the brown cover. If you're really lucky and you find the Strathmore Wind Power with the red cover, I really like that, but they don't make that anymore. But it's got a really nice amount of sizing that I think would be really nice for these markers. So you might find it at like a discount shop or something. But this 400 series, I actually like. I think it performs a lot like a cotton paper because it is a little bit more absorbent, and it does seem to absorb a little more uniformly than other cellulose papers. The Canson Montval might be a good option for these markers though, because it is so heavily sized and not very rough. I think that it would really reduce friction on the nibs and make your markers last a little longer. So that's another fun thing. If you can use a paper that's less expensive and get better results, that does kind of make the investment of these markers hurt a little bit less. What I'd recommend though, before jumping in for a full set, if you're not sure if you like markers, I was pretty sure I was going to like these because I like the Winsor Newton watercolor markers. I love alcohol markers. I don't know what it is. I think it's something just very whimsical and childlike about working with markers that just really brings me joy and I have a lot of fun. I really like it. So I was pretty sure I was going to love these. And plus I was going to review them. So it's like, I feel like that's a good investment. Spend the money, buy the whole set, especially since they used to be a lot more expensive. Blick's got a great price on them and their shipping is really fast and they do a great job at shipping well so your products aren't damaged. So I decided to splurge. I just finished a big freelance project. So I'm like, I'm treating myself to these. But you could definitely just buy a couple colors and see if you like them. Because they are formulated with those more transparent, finely milled pigments, you could get 3 primaries and you can mix your earth tones. And it wouldn't be all that different than using the earth tones in the set because they're not going to be using the mineral-based colors that you would get in like a brown. They're not going to have the iron oxides in them. They're going to be mixed with more light fast pigments, but not the ones that are earthy and sedimentary and whatnot. So I would highly recommend that before you go and spill $100 on markers. Maybe buy a couple, spend $12, buy 3 or 4 markers and see what you think, and then invest on there once you've used them up a bit and see what you think. Then you could see how long they actually last, how long 1 or 2 markers last, because when you have 30, it's hard to tell how long they actually last. If you buy 3, then you'll be able to tell how quickly you run out of a color, you know what I mean? And then you can have a good idea of whether it's a good investment or not for you. But I think these are going to last pretty well because there's so many colors, you're just not going to wear them down as quickly. I think what I would recommend, I really love that Scarlet Red and that Carmine Red. Both of those are pretty. I think you could go with either of them. Probably the Scarlet's a little more neutral. Go with that Lemon Yellow, maybe the Phthalo Blue. Grab a Cool Gray, like the Cool Gray Dark, so you can blend it out. Honestly, you could get a lot done with those 3 colors, or maybe you like to work with a little bit of an off palette and you want to go with like a like the Indian Red as your red, and you want to go with like an Indothrone Blue as your blue, and you want to go with Yellow Ochre as your yellow. I think it's Yellow Ochre that they have in that set, but that earthy yellow. Maybe that's what you want to do, and you want to do more of a stylized look. I think that would be totally valid. Or, buy a few and just add to it if you like them as you feel the need, as you see, I have a gap, I think I could really use this color. There's so many different ways to go about this. This is a quality product and I do recommend it. Now what I'm doing here at this step is I am using some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. That's another highly recommended product. It is a gouache, but the thing about this gouache that I think is an advantage over a gel pen or some other gouaches is that I think it's got some sort of shellac in it. It is rewettable, but it's got some sort of barrier in it. So kind of like a Kills primer, if you've ever used that in your house, you could paint over something and it's not going to leach the color back up through. So have you ever used a gel pen over markers or colored pencil and then especially like purples or reds, and then had the color leach through on you? That's not going to happen with the Bleed Proof White. There's something in it that's a barrier. Now, if you water down the Bleed Proof White, you will get a little leaching. You can get some leaching. But if you use it straight out of the bottle, it's going to block whatever ink or watercolor or colored pencil or marker, whatever you have underneath. It's going to keep it from leaching up through. So I highly recommend that. I have a little jar of it. I've been using it for about 8 years. I'm less than halfway through the jar. So I've got probably at least a third of that jar left. You get so much bang for your buck with that. It's $10, but that little jar is going to last you years. I use it so often and I still have probably 5 years left before I use that up. And you can add water to it if it starts to dry out. So highly, highly recommend that product by Dr. P.H. Martin. I'll link to it down below. It's a It's just such a great product. If you can only have one white, I mean, that's what I would go for rather than a tube of gouache. There were some areas where I felt like I just needed a little bit of accenting or a little bit more body to my color. So I'm using a little bit of some wax-based colored pencils. I have a variety. I've got some Prismacolor. That's kind of my go-to for this type of thing. But other brands that would work really well would be like Derwent ChromaFlow, Derwent Colorsoft, Holbein. I do have a couple Holbeins here. I have my Brute Funers and some Arteza and Mark Arts, any of those, like those are what are in my decoration colored pencil bin next to me, so I tend to grab those frequently for this sort of touch-up work. But wax-based pencils are a little bit more opaque, and they're great for just kind of tweaking your colors and adding a little bit too. Like, I forgot to put piths on any of my citrus here, so I was doing that at this stage. But that pretty much does it. I really love how this came out. I love how the original came out, and if you're interested in painting this and you would like the patterns and the reference photos and all of that jazz, check it out over on Critique Club. I'll put a link in the video description. I want to thank you so much for watching this today. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a thumbs up before you go. Until next time, happy crafting.